Good evening and welcome to our election special, the Kansas race for the Senate. I'm Brooke Lennington, and I'm joined tonight by KSNT News political analyst Bob Beatty.
Well, thanks, Brooke. With only 6 days to go until Election Day and many Kansans already voting, the U.S. Senate race in Kansas has drawn national attention not only due to the closeness of the polls, but also a possible historic outcome. So see the picture on your screen? That's the last U.S. Senator from Kansas from the Democratic Party, George McGill. He was elected in 1932, so yes, it's been 88 years since a Democrat won a Senate seat in Kansas, the longest one-party streak in the nation.
And this race is a battle between two doctors. We invited both candidates to the debate tonight. The Republican candidate, Congressman Roger Marshall, an OB/GYN from Great Bend, and the Democratic candidate, State Senator Barbara Bollier, a retired anesthesiologist from Mission Hills. However, only one candidate agreed to appear, and that is State Senator Barbara Bollier, who you see here in our studio now. And we want to be clear that we emailed, called, and even sent a certified letter to Congressman Marshall inviting him to participate tonight, but he ignored the request. And as part of that, we were clear with the candidates we would have just one candidate on to answer questions if just one agreed to participate. So to be completely transparent on the steps that we took to reach out to Congressman Marshall, we sent out an invitation by email and regular mail on September 29th, and that was certified mail. Now, we still hadn't heard from him by our deadline on October 6th. Then this week, 2 days ago, on Monday, Congressman Marshall finally responded on Twitter by posting that he could not make it due to a prior commitment in Southeast Kansas. But then just today, our sister station in Southeast Kansas caught up with Congressman Marshall and asked why we only heard from him this week on Twitter. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Look, we heard something about that debate in Topeka months ago, and then they dropped it. So I don't know if we got set up or what happened with that. We debated her once in Topeka already, debated her in Wichita, and we offered to do a third debate in Kansas City, and she refuses to do that. So I don't know where this debate in Topeka thing, I didn't even know about it till yesterday.
So just to be abundantly clear and to be completely transparent, this right here is a receipt showing that we sent Congressman Marshall a letter by certified mail on September 29th. We also, Bob, as we know, had just seen the tweet that showed on Monday, whether it was Congressman Marshall or someone from his campaign, that he did say that he had prior obligations, which is why. So not sure why he's saying that he thought that this was maybe some type of setup or maybe something we dropped, but definitely not the case.
Well, there was no setup, and as I think all our viewers know, KSNT loves debates. We would love to have had a debate. We really wanted to have a debate, and that was our intent, and we gave both candidates the opportunity to agree to one, but we also wanted the candidate that agreed to have a chance to appear as well, and that's why Barbara Bollier is here.
Absolutely. Now, I do want to add that one thing tonight, we are following CDC guidelines here in the studio and making sure that we're keeping our distance for safety reasons.
So, Senator Bollier, we have lots of questions, including some from our viewers. So again, thanks so much for joining us, and let's get to those questions.
Okay, so here is our first one that we have for you tonight. We are seeing numerous TV ads calling you a radical and dangerous for Kansas. And John asks, ads claim that you voted with Democrats the majority of the time when in the Kansas legislature. Is that true?
You know, the amazing thing about the Kansas legislature is we all vote together most of the time because we agree. We're representing Kansas, and most of the things are what are for the good of Kansas. Interestingly, I maybe have voted with Democrats 90% of the time. I also voted with Senate Majority Leader Jim Denning 87% of the time. So it just shows that we're close together, and I have always been a voice of moderation and a very independent voice, have always put people above party, and that's just kind of my history and why I'm trying to bring that to Washington.
Dr. Bollier, to sort of follow up a bit on that, one of the arguments that we've heard, especially in the television's ads, is that you're radical, they say, and they're basing that on a vote regarding the reporting of child sex abuse. So let's take a quick look at a TV ad clip.
I'm Dr. Roger Marshall, and I approve this message.
8 years ago, state legislators voted on a bill. Stronger penalties for those who know a child is being sexually abused but don't report it. 123 legislators voted yes. Only one extremist voted no.
So, Dr. Bollier, you get a chance to respond to that, and what do you say?
You know, how sad to watch someone so desperate to win that they will focus on things that really are misleading rather than what matters most to the people, which I am hearing is health care. So I have been a very, very strong advocate for children. As a legislator, I served on the Child Welfare Task Force, voted multiple times in making sure we funded education, worked to prevent things, have opportunities for people to have stiffer penalties for actual child abuse. This was a vote that it was a bad bill. It was really disappointing that my colleagues weren't listening to me when I said we do not need to felonize, make it a felony for someone to not report, someone who wouldn't have any training like a Sunday school teacher. And interestingly, yes, I stood up. I'm willing to be a person that does the right thing in spite of postcards. And the Senate never even took the bill up because they knew it was a bad bill. This has not become law. This is a desperate attempt to mislead voters about the kind of person that I really am and what I'll bring to the U.S. Senate seat.
Okay, and one of our viewers also wanted to know, Judy, she's asking, what was the deciding factor to make you switch parties several years ago?
You know, it was over time. So I grew up a moderate Republican. Nancy Landon Kassebaum, Senator Kassebaum, was my amazing role model, not only throughout my life, but of course once I got in the legislature, because she always put person over party and was willing to work across party lines. That's what I thought being a moderate Republican was, and I got to the legislature and I just found myself at odds with the party so many times. Things like I voted against the Brownback tax plan that decimated our state. That was against party leadership, hoping I was wrong saying so, but I wasn't. And then I worked with a group of moderates and Democrats together to override and end that terrible tax plan. I also always have believed in fully funding education for our public schools, and Republicans were not supporting that. And finally, Medicaid expansion. I advocated for it from the day that we found out it was an option for a state. And even though I was told, you're a Republican, the Democrats aren't even necessarily on board yet with this, but it was the right thing to do. Ultimately, I endorsed Laura Kelly, our governor, across party lines. Some of you may remember me being in the ad with Senator Tom Hawk. And it was right. Kansans agreed. And I realized it was time to change parties. My values didn't change at all. My votes have not changed at all. The party had changed, and now I'm a very proud, pragmatic Democrat and very ready to serve the state of Kansas, person over party first, looking for the people of Kansas in Washington.
Dr. Bollier, you mentioned former Kansas Governor Sam Brownback, and there's been some criticism of him from actually a lot of Democratic campaigns, but you know, we were curious, what about former Governor Jeff Collier? Was he a better governor than Sam Brownback?
You know, that's an interesting question. I have never been asked that before. And what was disappointing at the time was Sam Brownback was the one who vetoed Medicaid expansion in the state. And Governor Collier at the time, as a physician, had an opportunity to move that legislation forward and actually get care to the people of Kansas. So he chose not to. I was very, very disappointed in that.
And I do want to move on to the topic of gun safety here in just a moment, but one thing I wanted you to help us understand tonight is I know in a lot of your ads, you've been able to get a lot of Republican leaders to endorse you. You've been able to kind of, like you mentioned before when you were working across the aisle, it even seems now with your campaign. Do you feel like you've seen a big increase or a big push from that has actually helped you in this race so far?
Absolutely. And what it's telling you is that it's typical of Kansans. We're independent thinkers, and we want to move things forward and put people first. And those legislators, they know me. Those leaders, they know me, and they know that I am honest, I have integrity, that I work incredibly hard and do the background work that it takes to really get good public policy passed. I am so proud for their support and endorsement, as well as all the others across the state. I've had so many supporters that are Republican in name, and very much support that old style of Nancy Landon Kassebaum. And they have been disappointed as well with some of the places that the Republican Party has failed to lead on, and that's what they're saying. The people are voting with their support and saying, we like what Barbara Bollier has to offer, and we're ready to endorse her for this seat.
Understand. Now, let's move on to this gun safety issue like I was just mentioning. This is another area where your opponent is making arguments against you, this time with an Australian accent. Let's take a listen real quick.
A bloomin' Liberal. Bollier's money comes from California, but her ideas come from the outback. No guns, just wrong.
So what's your response to that?
You know, that was a clip taken out of a 6 to 8 minute, I think maybe it's 8-minute segment, a talk that I did, a lawn chair chat, where I was talking about my support of the Second Amendment. Too bad Roger always wants to cut and use things out of context. So I have stood very firmly in support of the Second Amendment, always. I grew up hunting. I own my father's, one of his shotguns still. You know, at this time of year when deer season's just starting, rifle, I miss him horribly because we shared those things together. And I just know as a physician that I have supported efforts to curb gun violence. We know it is a public health crisis, both in Kansas and in this nation, and we need to do simple things that we can agree on, like background checks that don't have loopholes through the internet, and making sure that we have safe gun storage, etc. And I know that we can work together on this. I understand that, again, my opponent just wants to misrepresent because that's all he can say. He wants to hide the fact that he wants to take health care away from all people with pre-existing conditions. It's so sad to see that.
And we, of course, will get into the subject of coronavirus and those pre-existing conditions like you were just mentioning with healthcare in our next segment. But before the break tonight, I do want to get a question about immigration. And do you support how the Trump administration has handled the illegal immigration issue? And if not, what would you do differently?
No. Washington is broken on immigration reform, and it isn't just this administration that hasn't dealt with it. It's gone on for years. Probably since the 1970s, we've needed reform. People do need a path to citizenship. I think it is immoral what has happened at the border, the separation of children from their parents, and now we can't even know who their parents are, and they're basically missing children now. We know where they are, but their parents don't. I think this is an absolute tragedy and needs to be addressed, and I look forward to being elected both to help that situation. Of course we need safe borders. We can all definitely agree with that, but we shouldn't be holding kids in cages like that, and we need to have an opportunity for people to become citizens. You know, 1 in 10 Kansans who work in the state are actually immigrants, and we are very dependent on their labor and their expertise and the way they help our economy grow. So I am very proud to help support them and get all of them on this path to citizenship when they're doing the right thing. That's very important to me.
Now, Dr. Bollier, somehow the issue with dreamers, children who came across illegally with their parents, got mixed up with building the wall. Do you support some sort of standalone bill or legislation to allow dreamers to stay in the United States?
Absolutely. Those children were brought here under no choice of their own. We've invested tremendously in these young people by educating them, as we should, and they should have a path to citizenship. And I've been supportive over the years as a Kansas legislator. We have passed a bill and have it in place that dreamers, if they are on a path to citizenship and have been educated in our state, they can have in-state tuition. All should have the opportunity to grow and have the best education and the furthest that they want to go in their career choices as possible. We need good people in the state, and I'm ready to have them. You know, they're citizens for everything but a piece of paper, and it's time to get them integrated fully into our society.
Very good. Well, we have already been here for about 15 minutes, so we're going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we'll talk more with Senator Bollier about her views regarding the coronavirus, health care, and more. Stay with us. Welcome back to our specials tonight, the Kansas race for the Senate. And with us tonight is Democratic Senate candidate Barbara Bollier. And a reminder that we did invite Republican Senate candidate Roger Marshall as well.
However, he did not respond to our phone calls, emails, and a certified letter asking him to participate by the deadline that we asked for. He did finally respond this week on Monday over Twitter, stating that he had a prior obligation in Southeast Kansas.
So now we want to get back to the questions for Senator Bollier, and this election will no doubt forever be known as the pandemic election. It has upended every aspect of our lives, and by Election Day, the United States will be approaching 250,000 dead. It also has caused a political divide in the country around safety measures, with some leaders discounting CDC guidelines and others abiding by them. So tell voters where you stand on the issue of whether U.S. leaders in the country have actually united us or divided us.
That's easy. Clearly, the divisiveness is palpable and incredibly disappointing as a physician. Now, we need leaders who will lead and follow science. That is exactly why I'm running, and have been truly appalled to see my opponent, a physician, going around the state without wearing a mask, shaking hands, having indoor events. What we need to do for this country is follow public health guidelines and wear masks, socially distance, wash our hands, do these things so that we can get our economy back on track, and so that we can get our kids back in school, and so that we can move forward. We don't know when there will be a vaccine, and it is not going to be next week. That is clear. And until that time, let's do everything that we can so that we can keep our economy going. And talk about divided. Here we have a United States Senate now going into recess, pushing some, a Supreme Court justice through, and not dealing with the needs of the millions of people in America who are hurting from this virus, need relief financially so they can pay their rent, so that their small businesses can stay in business, so that our teachers can have the support that they need, with, as well as all of our frontline workers, so that they have the PPE that they need, etc. So I personally have been wearing masks and have been so very proud of the Kansans. I've had lawn chair chats all around the state. Everyone comes in a mask. They're willing to social distance and do the right thing. Kansans are about neighbor helping neighbor, and that's what we need to do. Follow the advice of our Secretary of Health, Dr. Lee Norman, and do our best to keep these numbers down as low as possible.
Let's take a quick look at a clip from a Roger Marshall ad now concerning the coronavirus.
As a doctor, I like to fix things. I approve this message because our country is in critical condition.
Among the first to sound the alarm on COVID, Dr. Marshall deployed to the front lines to help. Service before self, ever since the Army. That's why Bob Dole says Dr. Marshall's the choice.
Roger Marshall has the best interests of Kansas at heart.
Now, Dr. Bollier, do you agree with Senator Bob Dole? Does Roger Marshall have the best interests of Kansas at heart, especially concerning the coronavirus?
Well, I respectfully disagree with Senator Dole, and I will tell you, I voted for Senator Dole every time he was up. But sadly, it is very clear as a physician, this is just basic, following science. Wearing a mask is so easy. Now, I would ask, I was willing to wear a mask in the operating room, and am absolutely doing it now in public, and any time that I think I might be in close contact with anyone, and just to lead and show people that this is doable. So again, no, I don't agree, and I think what we need, again, is a leader who will do the right thing and follow science and show people how wearing a mask is so easy to do to take care of one another.
And there is no denying that if you are elected, health care will be a big topic being discussed in D.C. next year. And we received 2 questions from viewers about this. So we'll start with Linda's question. If the Supreme Court overturns the Affordable Care Act, what will be your approach to provide affected Americans with health care coverage both in the short and long term? And here's another question from Robert, very similar. He wants to know, what would you do to expand health care services to rural areas, especially in Kansas? So 2 health care related questions here. What's your response?
You know, health care has been the #1 issue that I've heard from Kansans for over a year, and healthcare affordability and accessibility. And yes, there's a pandemic, but that is still the #1 issue for them in spite of that. So let's start with if the Affordable Care Act is struck down. First of all, that strikes fear into my heart. We need protections for pre-existing conditions, and that is one of the really tenets that everybody is supportive of in our Affordable Care Act, and it is the only thing that we have in place. And you know, I've heard from my opponent, oh, we'll change. We're going to do something to protect that. But there is no bill, there is nothing there ready to go. So if we have to get going, I'm ready to build back on what is working in the Affordable Care Act. And of course, we're going to have to wait and see if the Supreme Court rules. What do they find that isn't working? And we will have to address that. But moving forward, I would really like to see a public option buy-in as part an expansion of the Affordable Care Act, as well as keeping our current private health insurance. You know, many people are happy with that, and I'm a believer in competition. I think that helps and improves things. But some of the other things that we definitely need to address that didn't come through before, we should be able to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies for drug prices in this country. That's why Donald Trump said, you know, we should buy our drugs from Canada or from other countries. Their prices are lower because they negotiate, and it is against the law for Medicare, our #1 provider of insurance, to do that, and we need to change that so we can lower those costs and get to work on getting health care to everyone. And the other issue about the Affordable Care Act, you know, we need Medicaid expansion in this state. 80% of people in the state support it. Roger Marshall has voted against keeping the Affordable Care Act, which would take that opportunity away and take away health care for millions of the people in 40 other states that are covered by Medicaid expansion, as well as take away these protections for people with pre-existing conditions. And I'm a doctor who wants people to have health care. I think this is an moral obligation for the wealthiest country in the world to be able to make sure everybody has access to care.
And while this United States, of course, deals with this ongoing coronavirus pandemic, we're also dealing with another serious problem surrounding the race issue, including, but not limited to, the experience of people of color and their interactions with police and the criminal justice system. So talk to voters. In the nearly 5 months since the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, what do you think we can do to help America and help Americans become a more just and fair society for all of its citizens?
We have to start with the very notion that we do have racial bias and discrimination. Admit it. I'm raising my hand. We have it. So we need to work on getting training and understanding of what it is and how we can improve. You know, there's been, again, more misinformation by my opponent. Somehow I wouldn't fund the police. Of course we need to fund the police, but we need the police to have a support system with mental health and with substance use disorder clinics, etc. People end up in the criminal justice system that do not belong there, and we need to change things. You know, our black and brown brothers and sisters have said for years that they have been treated differently by the police and by our criminal justice system. So we need to do things like ban chokeholds and move forward, make sure there's funding so police can have community interaction and know one another. Things like coffee with a cop, and those things cost money. We need to do those things, listen to one another and say, yes, this is a problem. We need to address it. Everyone should have equality in this country.
We want to get to this question from Jim in Topeka. He wants to know, what are the 2 most important issues facing the U.S. Senate in January of 2021?
You know, and I want to be clear, my job as a U.S. Senator is to take what Kansas has as their most pressing needs. But one of the most urgent issues to me is the inability for Congress to work together. I'm raising my hand. I am so tired of the hyper-partisanship. And that's why when I said I would run, when you look at my logo, I have a red and blue intertwining line. It looks like DNA. I didn't know there was going to be a pandemic, but I did want people to think of science and to think of the very essence of who we are, DNA, and that we are to be building together. Yes, we're blue. Yes, we're red. And I always say, except when we're K-Staters, and then we're purple, but we're blue and red, and it's okay to have differences and to not agree exactly on everything, but we should be working to find common ground and work together. That is the most pressing need in our U.S. Senate and in Congress in general and in government right now in our country. As far as otherwise, obviously healthcare and making sure during this pandemic that we get help to the people. As I mentioned before, you know, our small businesses are struggling to keep people employed. We have people not able to pay their rent. We have people not able to afford their medicines or losing their health care if they had a job and don't. And some don't even have a job to go back to. And we have got to sustain those people, get them funds until we get a vaccine, which again, we don't know when that's going to happen.
Now, many people are talking about the idea of the Supreme Court. Of course, if you were elected, you'd be in the U.S. Senate. Senators confirm Supreme Court justices. Do you support any sort of ideas that would involve reforming the current Supreme Court system in the United States?
You know, right now I'm not really interested in that, and I certainly am not hearing it discussed on the campaign trail. But what I do want people to know is that I see that challenge as a U.S. Senator, what we have to do when we choose U.S. Supreme Court justices, we need to be sure that they have the right temperament, that they are people who follow the law. We need to know their record. And those are the very things that I will be asking someone if I have that chance and privilege to approve someone for that office. But we absolutely should not be politicizing our judicial branch of government. Neither the Supreme Court nor any other part. The whole reason our founding fathers created 3 branches of government was for a check and balance system. And the judiciary was to be non-political. And I support it not being politicized, and that is how I will approach those very important decisions as we look not only at Supreme Court justices, but other federal judge appointments. It's very important for the people to have fair judges.
And one thing is for sure, this race between you and Congressman Marshall, there's been a lot of TV ads. You yourself have run over 20 ads in this race, and your opponent has run many as well. So tell us something about yourself and the kind of senator you'd be that we won't learn in either your or your opponent's ads.
I want to answer that first. I hope you have learned in my ads that I am honest, I have integrity, I am running on a platform about what I can do and what I will bring, rather than spreading misinformation. I mean, my opponent's ads have been described as misleading and deceptive, and Kansans deserve a U.S. Senator who will bring honesty, integrity, what I consider Kansas values, to the floor of the U.S. Senate. So what else would you want to know? I am a hard worker, and it's hard to get that across in an ad. But if you asked anyone that's worked with me in the legislature, they will know no one works any harder than me about making sure that public policy is based on fact and science and data and is the right thing for the people. You look at my one time I voted differently than the House. That's the kind of person I am. I'm willing to stand up for what's right when the going gets tough. That's what we need, people who listen, follow data and science, and actually get the work done to solve problems. I hope that comes across in my ads. If only we had more time, right?
If only. And speaking of which, thank you so much for joining us here tonight for our U.S. Senate election special. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to come and answer not only our questions, but our viewers' questions as well.
Before we head to break, I do just want to mention a final reminder that Congressman Roger Marshall was invited to appear as well, but didn't get back to us until this week on Monday on Twitter. He said he wouldn't be attending this because he had this Q&A because he had prior obligations.
And now we're going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere because we've got a lot more coming up. Bob Beatty and I will talk with an expert on Kansas politics about this race that is getting national attention, and we'll also break down some of those controversial ads that you've been seeing. Stay with us. Thank you for joining us for our election special tonight, the Kansas race for the Senate. We just heard from Senate candidate Barbara Bollier in the first half hour, and a reminder that Congressman Roger Marshall declined to participate in this program, citing prior obligations. So now in this second half of our program tonight, we'll be breaking down the polling in this race and the TV ads and of course the big issues. And to do that, we're joined by Dr. Michael Smith, a professor of political science at Emporia State University. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Smith, for joining us tonight. So Dr. Smith, let's start with a question about running for Senate in the state of Kansas. As you and the viewers can see on the screen, the average margin of victory for Republican senatorial candidates since 1938 in 29 elections is about 25%. The last really close race was in 1974 after Watergate, when Bill Roy lost to Bob Dole by 1.7 points. So, Dr. Smith, why is it so hard for Democrats to win a Senate seat when in many Republican states like Montana and some in the South, they do seem to be able to win, but just not in Kansas? Why does that happen?
Well, I think part of it is the traditionally rural character of Kansas, which is changing. You know, the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party too, for that matter, have changed what they stood for over the years. But the interesting thing is that throughout most of its history, Kansas has stuck with the Republican Party. This is an if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of a state where traditions are taken very, very seriously. Also, the Republican Party builds an effective organization to help recruit candidates and train them and get them elected and, of course, raise money. It is possible for Democrats to win. We've had a number of Democratic governors, including the current governor, Laura Kelly. But I think in federal elections, it's harder for Democrats to get away from their national party, whereas in state elections, they might be associated more with the state party, which is perceived as being more moderate.
And Dr. Smith, Congressman Roger Marshall turned down our invitation to be here tonight, but he's also turned down several debates and Q&A opportunities like this in recent weeks as well. So can you speak to maybe his reasoning for turning these opportunities down, or maybe his strategy and why he's turning these down?
Well, I don't know for certain, but I'm happy to speculate because there is an obvious likely answer, and that answer is that he thinks he's the front runner. I know we're going to talk about polls a little bit. The polls are close, but the polls we're hearing about seem to show Marshall with a little bit of an edge. Of course, we learned to take polls with a grain of salt in 2016. But nevertheless, they're still important, and Marshall is behaving as if he is the front runner. And the thinking for front runners is don't take risks. You're already winning. Play it safe. Avoid places where you might make a possible gaffe. Whereas if you're the challenger, you might want to take a few more smart risks and try to change the game.
Now, Dr. Smith, you've been following this race like all of us have been. You and I are political junkies, so we've probably seen most of the TV ads. But, you know, you listen to Dr. Bollier. We know that Dr. Marshall is trying to portray here as being too radical. You listen to her answers. Do you think she's making headway in terms of getting people to not think she's too radical for the seat?
I think the attack on Bollier, most of it, now that thing about that vote she took, which she explained tonight, is kind of an outlier there, but most of it is trying to associate her with national Democrats, because certain national Democrats have become lightning rods, and none more so than Speaker Pelosi. Now, it's important to note that Barbara Bollier is running for the Senate. The Democratic leader in the Senate is Chuck Schumer. But Chuck Schumer just isn't as good of a lightning rod for rounding up votes. So a lot of the ads, including many run by independent groups, are trying to tie her to Pelosi instead, even though she would be across the Capitol in a different chamber. But again, it gets back to something I said earlier, that the state Democratic Party may be perceived, that's the party of Laura Kelly and Kathleen Sebelius, it may be perceived as being more moderate by many Kansans. And so what the attacks are trying to do is tie her instead to the national Democratic Party through fundraising and things like that.
And this race has resulted in millions being spent in ads, not just on TV, but everywhere, to YouTube, to our mailboxes, to even random websites. I was trying to buy a heated jacket the other day, and I was just scrolling through, and on this random website, there was an ad. At what point is it too much with all of these ads?
That is a great question. I've wondered that for years. You know, so many viewers now, of course they watch the news on this station because they want to be informed. But when they're not doing that, they tend to turn to streaming audio, and they tend to DVR their favorite TV programs if they're still watching cable and broadcast TV. And then they just fast forward through the ads. We see other commercials like all those funny insurance company ads that are designed to make people stop and want to watch the ads. I think that there is so much money being raised and spent that sometimes the campaigns are just looking for things to spend it on. Not only do I question the value of some of these ads, but I also wonder about things like robocalls. We have research showing that robocalls don't work. People hate them, but they still get them because some of these campaigns raise and spend so much money that they're actually looking for stuff to spend it on.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at how the Senate candidates are getting their message across using the modern technologies of 2020 and some of the controversies it's caused. So stay with us.
We are back with our election special for the Kansas race for the Senate. I'm Brooke Lennington, and I'm joined by KSNT's political analyst and my dear friend Bob Beatty. And Bob, this Senate race between Congressman Roger Marshall and State Senator Barbara Bollier is seeing a record amount of money being spent on Kansas advertisements alone. So as of today, Marshall, just for comparison, has had 27 ads. Bollier has had 30, and PAC ads, they've had a total of 59, bringing the total number of Senate ads since April to 116. So Bob, let's talk about why there are so many this year and how viewers can tell them apart.
Yeah, I think, Brooke, one of the reasons is we have to admit it, the pandemic. A lot of people are spending a lot of time at home, and I'm hearing from people, they're watching these ads. So, you know, I would argue that they are having some effectiveness simply because a lot of people are watching the news and watching these ads. So one thing, though, to keep in mind, Brooke, is the difference between political action committee ads and candidate ads. So if a candidate is paying for an ad, that candidate will say, I'm Roger Marshall, I approve this message. I'm Barbara Bollier, I approve this message. If it's a political action committee, they actually will not say that. They'll name the committee. So pay attention to those candidate ads because they will tell you that they're responsible for what they're saying. A
good easy way to kind of tell them apart, like you were mentioning. Now, one ad in this race caused some controversy by using video editing techniques. It was aired by Congressman Marshall. Let's take a look at it now.
How would it sound if Barbara Bollier's ads actually matched her liberal record?
Hear this.
Claims she's moderate.
But the truth is,
Bollier voted for dismemberment abortions.
That's what I believe in my heart.
Pushed a gun ban in Kansas.
I'll work to ban them nationwide.
Taxpayer-funded tuition for illegal immigrants.
It's our responsibility.
Liberal record. Liberal senator.
That's not happening.
Because Barbara Bollier is just too liberal.
I'm Dr. Roger Marshall, and I approve this message.
So Bob, what did Marshall do here in this ad, and is there anything an opponent can do about it?
So I've seen over 1,000 ads in Kansas history going back to 1968. This is something new, and this is the use of video from one candidate's ads then put in another candidate's ads to change the message. You just saw it. So they introduced, Marshall introduced one topic, and then it made it look like Bollier was talking about that topic and maybe supporting it. So this is a new technique. The only thing you can do about it if you're the other candidate is run an ad in response to it saying, hey, look what's happening.
Yeah, and of course to do that you've got to have the resources, but in this case Senator Bollier did. So let's look at her response.
Politicians, they'll try all types of things in their ads, but to actually edit video and completely change what an opponent says, now that crosses a line. And Congressman Roger Marshall got caught doing it. Marshall aggressively edited and manipulated video, took Barbara Bollier's words brazenly out of context. The real Barbara Bollier, a sensible centrist, independent, and above all, honest. Because in the U.S. Senate, character matters.
I'm Barbara Bollier, and I approve this message.
So what Barbara Bollier was able to do there is respond to Roger Marshall's ad. However, I have to point this out. In a democracy, it takes money to run ads. So if a candidate doesn't have the money to respond, then they're not able to do anything about an ad like that. And in this case, however, she was.
And you talked earlier about these political action committees. So now let's take a look at an ad put out against Barbara Bollier by the National Republican Senatorial Committee.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg knew no court packing.
I think that was a bad idea when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to pack the court.
But if liberal Barbara Bollier wins, she'd put far-left Democrats like Nancy Pelosi in control. The same Democrats who'd packed the Supreme Court, adding up to 6 new liberal justices, rubber stamping their far-left agenda. Liberal Barbara Bollier stands with them, not Kansas. NRSC is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So we see there that what I was talking about, it wasn't Roger Marshall saying I approve this message, it was a campaign committee. But also we see here what Dr. Smith was talking about earlier, which is Republicans want to nationalize this election, associating Barbara Bollier with national Democrats. And if Roger Marshall wins, we'll say that was an effective tactic.
And to be fair, we want to look now at also another PAC ad against Congressman Marshall. This one was run by a PAC committee called Duty and Country. Take a look.
We've all learned that Roger Marshall and his wife made a fortune when their for-profit hospital sold after forcing a non-profit hospital to shut down. But new rules were placed on doctor-owned hospitals to prevent conflicts of interest that threaten patient care. So in Congress, Marshall pushed to create a loophole while his family profited from more doctor-owned hospitals, looking out for his own interests. Roger Marshall, he's all about the money, not your health care. Duty and Country is responsible for the content of this ad.
Now, that's very common to see political action committees, Brooke, go negative, and that's what we're seeing there. And I think it's pretty clear that what this PAC is trying to do is really, we know Dr. Marshall is a doctor, and they're trying to chip away at, that integrity that's often connotated with being a doctor, and that's what this PAC is trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we kind of zoomed through those real quick, but I tell you what, this night's already going by so fast. Just about 10 minutes left here in our special. And we are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll talk with our political experts even more tonight. The race between Congressman Marshall and Senator Bollier stands. Where does it stand tonight? That's the big question we want to get answered. So we'll tell you about that coming up. Don't go anywhere. And now time for our final segment tonight in our election special, the Kansas race for the Senate. I'm Brooke Lennington, and I'm joined here by my pal and good friend, KSNT political analyst Bob Beatty, and our guest as well, Dr. Michael Smith, professor of political science at Emporia State University. And now this Senate race in Kansas between Congressman Roger Marshall and Senator Barbara Bollier has received national attention because of the stakes regarding control of the U.S. Senate. So, Bob and Dr. Smith, where does the race stand right now?
So what I've done, Brooke, is I've averaged the polls. We're not going to look just at one particular poll. So when we average the polls, what I found is that Roger Marshall's sitting at 46%, Barbara Bollier 42%, and undecided at 11%. So I guess I would ask Dr. Smith, does this polling look about right for you when we average it, that it's maybe a little bit of a lead for Roger Marshall at this point?
Well, it's very consistent with my expert that I consult on polling, a fellow named Bob Beatty. But on a more serious note, I would zoom in on those undecideds. Undecideds are not what you may think. Undecideds are not 50-50, can't make up their minds. Maybe there are a few people like that, but they're relatively rare. Most undecideds are leaning toward a candidate and waiting for the candidate of their choice to close the deal.
And real quick, I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding mail-in voting, voting early, just everything that's gone into this election. What can you tell voters who are concerned about whether their vote will truly be counted accurately?
Well, I've been studying this for several years, actually. I find the whole thing fascinating. First of all, the claims of voter fraud are generally baseless. There are a tiny, tiny number of isolated cases, but they're very, very rare. The safeguards we have in place tend to err on the side of not counting valid ballots rather than allowing voter fraud. So voter fraud is not a concern. A bigger concern is administration. It's overseen by the Secretary of State, Scott Schwab, here in Kansas, but the actual ballot counting is actually done by the counties. And that means receiving ballots if they're mailed in, validating signatures and envelopes and all of that sort of thing, and actually counting the ballots. And these are for folks that work very, very hard. They're going to be asked to do a lot in a short time. And we just want to make sure that the Secretary of State's office is setting fair and uniform standards and doing the proper training so that a ballot that would count in one county also counts in all counties, and that there aren't multiple different, 105 different sets of standards.
Now you mentioned these undecided voters, I mean, other than the program tonight, for example, but is there anything these candidates can do in the last few days to get those undecided voters with such little time remaining?
They need to respond to the negative ads that we've been talking about. The classic modus operandi of negative advertising is to demobilize your opponent's supporters. It's not to get people to switch, it's to get your opponent's supporters so turned off that they don't vote for your opponent. Maybe they don't vote at all, or leave that part of the ballot blank, or vote for a third-party candidate, but you demobilize your opponent's supporters. And so what they each need to do is break down that undecided 11% that you just showed, Bob, and they need to figure out how many of those are leaning toward them and what they need to do to close the deal. And it may be that with the airwaves saturated with all this negative advertising, the undecideds have some questions about those, and those are questions that the candidates are going to need to answer for their voters.
And real quick, Dr. Smith, where do you see this race going? Who do you see winning?
It looks like Marshall has an edge, but keep in mind those numbers Bob just showed are within the margin of error, so it's too close to call. However, Bollier has a little bit more work to do to close the gap with her undecideds than Marshall does.
Very good. Well, that is all the time we have for our election special tonight, the Kansas race for the Senate. Thank you so much to Senator Bollier, of course, for joining us, and as well as Dr. Michael Smith and our political analyst, my good friend Bob Beatty, for joining us as well. Whether it's voting by mail, voting early at your local polling place, or in person, remember to make your voice heard and vote by November 3rd or before. I'm Brooke Lennington. Thanks for watching.